Well, Buzz, I appreciate you doing this, and I'm glad we
Yeah,
finally.
something. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be fun.
I do too. I do too. And give us a feel for your background with Sonar.
Well, I was actually working retail, managing a drum shop at a retail outlet in Richmond, Virginia, when I got a call from a person inside Hohner who had to do with the accordion division and harmonica division. And I had built them some flight cases for their expensive $15,000, $30,000 accordions. And so they knew me, and they gave me a call at the retail outlet and said, "Hey, do you know anybody that would like to work for a drum company?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, me." And really, I didn't know which drum company they were referring to when I went out to the interview. I had been playing Ludwig, and I knew about Slingerland and Gretsch, but I really didn't know anything about Sonor when I first got there. But after getting there and seeing the product a little bit, I was excited to be able to do the job, or get asked to do the job, to work as a product manager. And I really didn't know how far the product manager position would go, but it went a lot farther than I ever realized.
Well, give us an idea of what you saw Sonar-wise. What products were current at that time?
When I first got hired, their main line was phonic. They had the phonic line. They had the signature line. Signature line was the Horse Link Signature Series line. And he put his name, his signature on the badges for the line. It was supposed to be the ultimate drum line. When I got hired, they immediately wanted me to train with Sonor, with their people in the factory. So I made my first trip over there, and I got picked up by Horse Link's driver at the airport. And he didn't speak English, and I didn't speak German. And so we had an interesting trip back to Huey. And on the way, we picked up Horse Link, who was at a World War II reunion. And Horse spoke English very well, of course. And we rode back to Huey, and then the next several days I met Karl-Heinz, who's now basically the head of the Sonor drum company. And he helped me train and took me through the factory and showed me everything about the drums.
Now, when you say train, what did that entail?
It actually entailed learning how to repair Sonor drums and adjust Sonor drums, especially the parallel snare action mechanism that they had on their Signature Series drums, which was pretty advanced and pretty complicated. And I had to take it apart and put it back together like you would train to use a gun or something. We had to take everything apart and learn how to lube things and adjust it so it worked perfectly and that kind of thing. That was one of the main things.
Okay, so you hire on with virtually no knowledge of Sonor, and you fly to Germany and experience what goes on at the factory. At that point, what was your attitude towards Sonor as a company and their product line?
Well, I was pretty blown away by the quality of the materials that they used and the way they made their shells. Their shells they had a special process that now a lot of people have copied, but it was a cross-laminated, pressure-sensitive process where these large molds, you'd put the laminates 3-ply at a time, laminates together, and it would compress it all and heat it at the same time and make a tube. And then they could cut off the shells at different depths. That was one of the main things. And then the construction was exquisite. I mean, they did everything in-house. They did all the woodworking in-house. They did all the metal fabrication, the shell fabrication, the rim fabrication, and all the plating. They had a triple plating process, which was standard back then. You had copper, nickel, and chrome plating, chrome being the hardest, so it would protect everything underneath, and copper allowing everything to stick efficiently to the steel. And it gave a deeper luster in the chrome plating. I think Premier did a similar thing. And probably the American, I think Slingerland and Ludwig actually did the same thing at the beginning too. Everybody was copper nickel and chrome plating until the EPA got involved and started changing things around. Their products were almost over-engineered, but everything was much more substantial. The tension rods were a little thicker, the rims were a little thicker, wood was a little thicker, and it was always high quality. They used a lot of beechwood because that was a tree that was plentiful in Europe and very dense. So instead of using maple, they were using beechwood, where U.S. manufacturers often use maple, which is also a very dense wood and good to work with.
How did your relationship with the people at Sonor, Karl-Heinz Menzel and Horst Link and others, how did that evolve over time?
Well, at the beginning, Karl-Heinz was, like I said, he was just working in the factory at the time and also helping with some of the artist relations. He actually trained me about all the materials and workmanship in the drums and what they do. And it also showed me, they also do educational percussion, the Orff instrument line, and they make that in-house. We're making that. So it's a lot more woodworking than people realized. They were very well versed in that, and it was all done in-house. You know, it was beautiful, a beautiful operation. They also made their own drum heads at that time. While I was with Sonor, or with Hohner and Sonor, they decided they wanted to control some of the production a little more, so they started making their drum heads again in-house.
And how was the quality of that compared to Remo?
The quality of the drum heads was excellent. The way they fixed the plastic mylar into the rim of the drum head was not so much glue, it was more of a crimp process. I think Remo at that time was using some kind of a glue to hold it into the flesh hoop of the drum head, but that time Sonor developed something else that was a little bit more substantial. Not glue, it was a crimping process.
Were they still making drum heads when you left?
Actually, no, I think they'd stopped.
And why did they stop?
I think it was. I think it just eventually it was not cost effective to do it. And then a lot of people in the U.S., since they were trying to grow their business in the U.S., most of the drummers in the U.S. were playing Remo anyway. That time, I mean, there was Evans drum heads were around too, but at that time, when I was at the beginning, when I was with Sonor and with Hohner, Evans drum heads were really a minority drum head manufacturer. There were hardly any Evans outlets. It was hard to find an Evans drum head. So all the drummers were playing Remo, and so it made more sense to put them on for export, to put Remo drum heads on their drums than Sonor drum heads.
As time went on during your tenure, how did did your duties change any, and how?
Yeah, at the beginning, I was involved with ordering all the parts and all the drums, placing the purchase order for drum sets into the U.S. market with Hohner. And I also was responsible for, obviously organizing the parts department and doing customer service with all the dealers that we had, taking care of that. But at the same time, there was nobody in the U.S. to handle endorsements. So I ended up being involved with the endorsers and servicing their needs also. And if there was a clinic tour, or if some drummer from Europe was touring the U.S., I was involved with arranging for all their products, their drum sets for their shows and stuff, and shipping and receiving for those products, and scheduling, making sure everybody had drum sets where they're supposed to be for the artists. So it expanded from a product management position into not only into a artist relations position too, as well as sales, because I also was selling to all the drum shops, because really very few people in the office knew anything about drums. So drum shops would call up and they had specific questions regarding product and what was in stock, etc. So I got to know most of the drum shops in the U.S. and the main retail outlets that were selling Sonor, and serviced all those accounts in sales.
Any favorite endorsers or anything that just jumps out at you that would be an interesting story?
Well, I immediately got involved with the top endorsers, and those at that time were probably Steve Smith, in the rock arena. And then Jack DeJohnette, who was always playing and touring somewhere. And Adam Nussbaum, Will Kennedy at that time with the Yellow Jackets. I didn't do much with the European endorsers until they came over, and then I was involved with Mickey D occasionally, and not so much the drummer for AC/DC, but I mean I knew they were always over here playing, but I never really was involved with AC/DC that much. I was the main endorser for them. And Nico McBrain, we did some things with Nico McBrain. A lot of the heavier drummers, heavy metal drummers, or a lot of rock drummers would play Sonor, especially the Phonic Plus series, which was, I think, probably the series that put Sonor on the map for that genre of music.
Did you ever have any dealings with Todd Sucherman?
Oh, later on, yes. Todd was a very big fan of Sonor and had owned several sets. One of the problems with doing artist relations out of the Hohner facility and representing a European or a drum company that's not located in the U.S. is the financial responsibilities of a distributor. Distributors normally don't like to fund the marketing and artist relations type efforts in providing drum sets. Sonor was responsible for most of the artist relation things. Hohner wouldn't fund giving away drum sets, so I was approached by tons of drummers, of course, that wanted to play Sonor, but they were required to buy their instruments, at a special price or something like that.
Did that create a special loyalty for the ones that would pay for the drums?
Actually, I've always maintained that companies don't endorse players. Players endorse product. And that switched around back in the 60s with Buddy Rich and Slingerland and Ludwig and all these others. That's when things started changing. They were more or less endorsing him or endorsing a player. And, people would call up and say, I'm looking for an endorsement. And I would say, what are you playing right now? And they'd go, I don't know, Tom. I said, well, then you endorse Tom right now, right? And they'd be caught trying to figure out what I was getting at. But what I was getting at is, players gravitate toward a certain sound and a certain drum set, and that's essentially what they endorse. That type of endorsement is more valuable, I think, than giving somebody a drum set and saying, hey, here you go. Now you're an endorser. Bernard Purdy was also one of the major endorsers for Sonor back then. I forgot about that, yeah.
Well, as far as Sonor in Germany being part of the financial support of all that, the marketing and endorsement and all that, did the German mentality differ from what people's expectations were after working with American companies?
Yeah. When I started with Sonor, they were really nationalistic. They were really more interested in maintaining control of the whole product and the endorsers and everything else. So that's why there was such a limited amount of endorsers. A lot of European drum companies, Chinese and Japanese drum companies sometimes they just don't appreciate how big the American music market is and what an incredible export product American music really is. And so they would, they wouldn't often take our word for it that this is an up-and-coming band. A prime example was Huey Lewis. Huey Lewis's drummer played a phonic kit on most of the records. And I went to see him and talked to Bill Gibson and said, hey, he said, well, I'm going to need a new drum set. Well, we couldn't give him a drum set. So eventually, Sonor didn't think they were that big a deal over in Europe. And they didn't want to support it either, so he went to Yamaha. And that happened on a lot of different occasions. In defense of Sonor, or any drum company, or any cymbal company, you can't support 300 artists. It's not cost effective, number one. Number two, you can't make use of all those people in advertising. You can advertise one or two people throughout a year and be able to make use of their face and their influence in the market. But you can't use all these other, you can't really use all these other drummers. I think probably Gretsch Company did the best job of utilizing endorsers. They had Phil Collins, they had Tony Williams, Harvey Mason, one country guy, And so they had like 4 or 5 endorsers, and one in each general market: rock, jazz, country, blues, or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they used and they had that guy from the Stones.
Yeah, Charlie Watts.
Charlie Watts. So they had like 5 major endorsers, and that was all they needed. And Sonor had the same thing. They had Steve Smith. But they did have Vinnie Colaiuta at the beginning too. They had them both, but they didn't take advantage of Vinnie. They just stuck with, and Steve stuck with the company a long time. So did Jack DeJohnette. They're probably 2 of the oldest endorsers. And the guy from AC/DC, he's been around a while too with them. Well, all these people want to be endorsers. It's just very difficult, you know, to keep them all happy. So they lost Will Kennedy. They lost Jerry Brown. They lost Bernard Purdy. They lost, I mean, yeah, they all wanted to play the best drums in the world, and they lost Tony Williams. Tony Williams wanted to be a Sonor endorser too, but he wanted like 9 drum sets strategically placed worldwide. And I mean, they just, you know, they just couldn't do it. They had Cindy Blackman too. Well, everybody wants to, quote unquote, endorsed. The reality of the situation is it just doesn't make that much sense.
You were involved in the international design team. Can you tell us about that?
After the Phonic era, then they came out, a lot of people in the U.S. and all the world, these drums are too heavy, they're too heavy, they're so heavy. So Sonor went the exact opposite direction and made Sonorlite, which were a huge hit and still are very popular drums out of Scandinavian aircraft birch. Scandinavian birch, which was used originally in aircraft production in Germany. And they made this light series, which was a very thin 9-ply shell. Again, still 3-ply layup, 9-ply shell, but just extremely thin and light. Had a different sound, of course, using the same mounting hardware, and was a big hit. After they had the Sonorlite, they came out with the Signature Light.
And what was the difference there?
Just instead of using beechwood as the 9-ply part of the shell, they used the birch. So it was birch with babinga on the inside and outside, or birch with ebony on the inside or outside. And the sizes were Sonorlite sizes, not signature heavy sizes. It's a very popular drum set also. I mean, I actually own a Signature Light and a Signature Heavy.
You did or do?
I do.
What all do you currently have?
Currently, I still have a Hilite kit. I have, most of the tom sizes. A Hilite kit, a Sonorlite kit with almost all the sizes. And a Signature Heavy and a Signature Light kit in graphite metallic. And, Impala lacquer, Impala lacquer. And then I have the Hilite kit, the designer kit, which I use mostly right now, in white sparkle, birch.
And what shells did you get that in? Birch. And is that still one of your primary kits?
I'd say I use the Sonorlite kit, and I use the designer kit. Yeah, mostly.
So you're pretty still of a Sonor mindset when it comes to your gear. Would that be correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I still play Sonor primarily. Oh, yeah, primarily. Occasionally I'll use a vintage kit for a vintage Slingerland kit or something like that for a different band or something, but my main kits are Sonor Sabian. And after that, the complaint was, Sonor doesn't make anything with maple. And the other thing they were addressing was that was when rims mounting started to come out, and people were raving about a rims mounting system, isolation mounting. So Sonor approached it from a totally different direction, because their whole philosophy had been that the shell needed to be rigid and the head vibrated, not that the whole unit vibrated. And so their philosophy was they wanted to maintain their philosophy of design by addressing the isolation part through isolating the parts on the shell instead of isolating the entire drum as a unit and letting the whole unit vibrate. They let the shell still be inert to the sound and stopped the vibration of the parts on the drum. The Hilite mounting system, which isolated all the metal parts from the drum.
And was that a result of the international design team?
That was not. That didn't happen until the designer series, which was the next step. They needed a flagship. They were going to retire the signature series drums. Now moving toward the isolation part of it, more toward isolating parts of the drum set. And the signature series would have to be completely redesigned to do that. The lugs were different and all this other stuff was different. So they changed their lug design. And as they changed their lug design, they wanted to utilize that in the top series because it appeared that the Hilite series had better design features than the signature series. And they were promoting the Hilite series as almost like the flagship of the line. So they decided instead of trying to redo the signature drums, they would just go on to a whole new series. And that's when they had the international design team. And they had people from all over the world. And we worked on it for several weeks, and put our heads together and then had a second meeting. And all the ideas came out and, they filtered through all the ideas that everybody had. And what was born out of it was the designer series. The mounting bracket on the toms, you could adjust the sustain of the drum by tightening one of the fittings on the tom holder. You could adjust it. And one of the complaints about a rims mounting system is the sustain of all the drums just bleeds together. So the drums all start to sound the same. They all bleed right into each other. With this system, you could adjust the sustain of each drum while having it sustain to its max, then cut it back just enough so that each drum spoke a little better and clearer. And the designer series worked beautifully like that. I don't know if you've ever played a designer kit, but pretty amazing. They sound great. Really. You could also pick your shell. Nobody had done that. You could pick a thick shell maple, thin shell maple, or birch, I think.
Didn't Slingerland become part of HSS at one point?
Yes. This is a pretty good story, actually. What happened originally, we were involved with carrying not only the drum set line of Sonor, but the Orff instruments. And one of the main people that had come down from Long Island to work with Hohner in Richmond ran that division, the Orff division. Well, he left and went to Core, back up in Long Island. And he was a good friend of Horst Link's. And Korg at that time was doing Marshall amplification and Korg keyboards, and they were very good at artist relations and being involved with all the hip bands and all this other stuff. So he kept talking to Horst Link about this, and Horst finally made a decision to take Sonor away from Hohner and give it to Korg. And so HSS, which was Hohner, Sonor, Sabian, most of the sales force for Hohner and Sonor were percussion-oriented guys. They're almost all drummers. They sold Hohner guitars and some other things. Primarily, they were out there selling Sonor and Sabian. Okay. We were the main distributor for Sabian at that time, too. So when we lost Sonor, we didn't have a drum company to sell. We didn't have anything to sell. So what was available? You couldn't do Tama, you couldn't do Yamaha. They were all doing their own thing. Couldn't do Pearl. The only thing that was laying dormant, well, we thought about Gretsch, but Gretsch was handling his own thing. And at that time, just prior to this, Fred Gretsch had obtained the Slingerland asset, everything from Slingerland, and was just sitting on it, hadn't done anything with it. They bought all the machinery, he had all the parts and some of the drums, and he was, Fred's always been an entrepreneurial type. He tries to develop different things. So he was just sitting on it. So when we asked about Gretsch, he said, no, but I do have Slingerland. And Horst Muka approached me and said, what do you think about this? And I said, I'd I'd be excited to do that. I would be excited to do the Slingerland thing. I think we can make it work because several of our salesmen used to work with Slingerland directly anyway, had been selling Slingerland for a long time. So Horst Mucha got a good feeling from the sales force that they were excited about it, and he put me in charge of the whole project. If you think you can do it, we'll do it. And I said, okay. And he had confidence in me enough to put me in charge of the entire project, which entailed everything that a drum company would possibly do. That means designing and speccing all the drum sets and products of Slingerland. And at that time, before Slingerland was kind of dormant, they were one of the biggest drum companies in the world, for sure. They were making timpani, they were making tune percussion, they had Deegan instruments, they had marching percussion. You know, they were full-line percussion house. Not unlike Ludwig at that time.
What happened to them?
I think what happened to them, from all indications, is they went to the Magnum series, was their last-ditch effort to develop new product, really. And there were some engineering faults in parts of them. It cost them a fortune to do all the molds. That's when things were starting to change in the U.S. regarding molding and everything. People were going offshore to do molds because it just got too expensive. And Slingerland got caught right in the middle of that and spent a fortune on molds and all kinds of parts and everything, retooling everything for the Slingerland Drum Company, and which they needed to facelift. They did, but they got stuck, and it didn't sell. It didn't. Well, the stuff, there were some faults. There were some design mistakes in some of the things, so the stuff didn't work like they had planned, and they took it on the chin, and so they kind of went down after that. And there was somebody else in charge of Slingerland at that time. I'm not sure who it was, but it just didn't work out right, and so they sold it off eventually to Fred bought it. So I got put in charge of designing and revamping the whole Slingerland Drum Company. And basically, I started out by first reintroducing the Radio King snare drum. The shells were made in Arkansas, one ply, and they were assembled in the Gretsch factory to my specifications. And so we introduced that as the flagship instrument of the Slingerland Drum Company, the Radio King snare drum, which it still is. We needed something to sell for drum sets, so I developed this. The last thing Slingerland had been doing that was affordable was the Spirit line, so we reintroduced the Spirit line of drums, and that was, just basic five-piece covered drum sets, mahogany, maple, mahogany shells, and just a basic, five-piece drum set to get it out on the market so our salesmen had something to sell. At the same time, I had known that Slingerland was very well connected in the jazz market. That was one of their main things. They were well known. Most of the old jazz recordings from the 30s, 40s, 50s were on Slingerland drums. The greatest drummers in the world played Slingerland. Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich. And so I wanted to take advantage of that heritage and develop drum sets to go along with that jazz idiom. And at that time, nobody was doing or focusing on that. So I hit a home run because I developed, 18-inch kits, 20-inch kits, 4-piece kits, not 5-piece kits, 4-piece jazz kits, wide variety of finishes. And I was able, by working with several of the retailers in the New York and Northeastern United States area, I was able to, and Texas actually, find the up-and-coming young lions of the jazz scene. And I was able, since these drum sets, these little jazz drum sets didn't cost that much, I was able to convince Hohner to give away a ton of small drum sets and secure the endorsement of an incredible amount of jazz artists. All the main guys from New York were involved. Kenny Washington, Jimmy Cobb, the list goes on and on and on. And they all were playing a drum set that sounded precisely like they wanted it to sound. That drum set is all over everything. And that was the Artist series, which was maple, mahogany maple shell with stained finishes. No coverings. After that, I introduced the Artist Classic, which were the same drum sets in Champagne Sparkle, White Marine Pearl, the Slingerlandlite Marine Pearl, which is a blue White Marine Pearl, and the black Slingerland Black Diamond, the original finishes, the original coverings. And those things took off like hotcakes. I mean, and it was a serious growth thing going on. While this was also going on, I developed the Slingerlandlite series, fashioned a little bit off the Sonorlite series, with the same shell dimensions, only not in Scandinavian birch, but in high-density maple. And so the Slingerlandlite series was going to be more or less the signature series for Slingerland. And we went forward with that being made in the Gretsch factory. Those were made in the Gretsch factory. And had some of the features. I used some of the molds from the Magnum series, the big butterfly wing nuts and the square brackets and the bracket on the bass drum, on the tom holder bracket. The stands were fashioned after the Magnum series, but I changed the mechanisms inside so they functioned correctly. Instead of having a lever locking, we had just a regular wing nut type operation.
Did y'all do any retooling?
Yeah, we had actually Hohner paid that at my request, paid for the molds to be made and trusted me to do it. And so we did new molds for all the Slingerlandlite stuff. The Slingerlandlite, the brackets, the throw-offs, all that.
Now, were those done in the States or offshore?
They were done in Taiwan.
Is that where the Artist series drums are being made too?
Slingerland Artist, Slingerland Spirit, Artist, and Classic were all made there, yes. Okay. We sent over the plastic, we sent over the coverings, and we QC'd the operation over there. I spent several trips over to Taiwan to coordinate that. So then, after about 3 years, Slingerland's growth pattern was doing really well. Well, somehow, Korg evidently didn't keep the ball rolling with Sonor, so eventually the Sonor drum set part came back to HSS. And so we were doing Sonor and Slingerland out of the same office, and I was responsible for all the ordering of both. With Slingerland, I was involved with all the international sales worldwide. I was selling everybody in the world, in addition to doing the product design, all the marketing, everything. You know what I mean. Artist relations, everything. All the photography, responsible for coordinating it all. I was pretty much heading up the whole thing. And then we got Sonor back. And then I actually hired Bob Sadlowski and Tim Henry. They both came down. Well, Tim Henry came from Gretsch actually and worked. He was working with me on Slingerland and helping with that. And he was working with the Orff instruments also from Sonor after he came down, after that stuff. Because we never lost Sonor Orff. We only lost the drum set part. And he had worked for Fred Gretsch, so he knew the Slingerland stuff a little bit and was excited to work a little bit with us. And then after Korg lost Sonor, the guy that was helping out there at Korg, Bob Sadlowski from Long Island, he came down and worked with us down here at Hohner. And he worked mostly on the Sonor project, so I could devote time to the Slingerland thing. And what happened with the Slingerland thing after that, a couple more years, Fred sold it out from under us and sold the whole thing to Henry at Gibson. Henry Justowitz at Gibson. He was running Gibson. He still does run Gibson. And so they got a hold of Slingerland and had it first. I still have it, but it's pretty much a nude issue. I mean, there's nothing going on with it.
All right, so with Slingerland out of the way, what was going on with Sonor in the low end?
When Hohner lost Slingerland, we lost an incredible amount of sales of low and mid-price product. All that spirit sales, artist classic sales, we didn't have anything. So we tried to talk to Sonor into making low-end drums, having some low-end products. Well, they, of course, were very adamant about not wanting to deal with it. I said, we got to have something to replace this product. We have just built an entire line of drums based on jazz-sized drums and everything. Well, Sonor wasn't really interested in it. They were doing basic 5-piece kits. They were doing the performer drums, which were just beechwood drums with coverings on them at a lesser price, different bearing edge and stuff. Very nice drums, but they weren't the right sizes. They didn't want to do all these other sizes. They didn't want to mess with it. So Horst said, you do it. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went over to that Slingerland factory and made the Force series. Force and Force custom drums. And we did that, not Sonor Germany. Sonor Germany gave me the badges to put on it.
Wasn't that line originally Force by Sonor before actually being badged a Sonor?
Yes. There was a Force series they tried to do, but it was too expensive. And again, they didn't have the right sizes. So they were missing the mark. So Horst Luca got me to do the Force series and Force custom series in the right sizes. And again, we approached the jazz sizes again and did that. Now, if you look at the Sonor line now, what do you see? Jungle kit, bebop kit. What else? There's three things: 14, 16, and 18 bass drums. Offshore drum sets. They sound great, and they provide a drum set to the jazz market at a much lower price. So they got the message finally.
Were you able to hold on to your former Slingerland customers?
Yes, because what happened, in addition to us losing those drum sets and those buyers, Slingerland under Gibson stopped all the import of all those things that were very successful in the marketplace and decided we're just going to make them in the U.S. Well, they tried to make them in the U.S. and of course they were way too expensive. And they didn't have the sizes. They missed the whole market. And we were able to pick up a lot of those customers because we were making a similar product with the Sonor fittings, Sonor lugs, and etc.
So if you A-B'd the Slingerlands and the Spirit series and the Sonor Force stuff, how close were they? I mean, they're made in the same plant, different fittings and all that, but how close were they to each other?
They were pretty close, except for the Slingerland rims are a significant design feature of Slingerland. Those rims make those drums sound a little bit, quite a bit different. They're inward flange versus outward flange, and they sound similar, but not identical. And it didn't make sense to do the Slingerland finishes in Sonor. See, that's what that nostalgia for white marine pearl and black diamond pearl from the Slingerland era of production doesn't make sense on a Sonor drum. It just doesn't make sense.
Sure.
So we weren't able to hold on to all the customers, of course, but we did pretty well. We did fine. And then eventually, I forget what happened, but I ended up leaving. So, after the designer series, I ended up leaving, I think, sometime after that. The management changed slightly in the Hohner hierarchy. So that, my job became a little bit less exciting, I guess. And I just thought I needed to change after about 12, 15 years, something like that.
What story would you want to tell the most from that period?
Oh, I think I've got a couple, but I had a lot of interesting experiences over at the Frankfurt trade show, along with Karl-Heinz Menzel, and I had a couple interesting things with Slingerland over at the British Music Fair too. The two stories. I have two stories, one from each era or each drum company. But for Sonor, I remember I had to go over to meet with Karl-Heinz at least once a year at Frankfurt, and maybe sometimes twice a year to check out new products and stuff. So we were over there at one time at the Frankfurt Fair, and after the Frankfurt Fair, they were going to start some Steve Smith clinics at several different cities, and I was tagging along with them, and Karl-Heinz was driving a van, and we were, Steve, me, and Karl-Heinz in the van going from city to city. Well, one of my favorite stories is when we ran out of gas on the Autobahn with Steve Smith in tow. So Karl-Heinz said, I just found pictures from this, actually. I did find a picture from this. So then Karl-Heinz had to hoof it to the nearest gas station on the Autobahn to try to get some gas, get back in. And we ended up having to push the van a little bit to get something going. And Steve Smith and myself were out there pushing this van down the Autobahn. And finally we got it going again. And then we went a little farther, went a few more miles, and then ran out of gas a second time. And I had to do it again. Anyway, that's one story. Then the other story is with Slingerland. I was invited by Fred Gretsch to go over with the Hohner people, who were the Gretsch distributor, Gretsch guitar and drum distributor, over in London for the British Music Fair. And they had a booth, and we were doing Slingerland, and they were going to be our Slingerland distributor also. So I got invited over there to be on the booth and everything and set up the Slingerland stuff and train the Hohner guys about the Slingerland Radio Kings and the drum line and everything. So I get over there early, of course, because we're there a couple days early, and the drums didn't make it yet. My display isn't showing up. So I forget when it was supposed to start, maybe on a Thursday. We were supposed to be setting up on Wednesday. Well, the stuff, I got like a couple of snare drums and a couple of stands and didn't get any of the drums. So the booth is empty, basically. And I just left that afternoon and went home, and I got a call from Fred Gretsch, and he said, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, I'm still waiting on these drums. They haven't gotten here. He said, well, listen, I got a little thing we might want to do. Can you meet me at my hotel? I said, sure. So I go over there, and he comes down with his wife, and they've got a guitar case with him. He says, come on, we're going over to Apple Music. And we take a cab over to Apple. You know, that's the Beatles place, right? Okay. Beatles. Yeah, Apple Records. And a guy comes down, and it's, I forget what his name was. But anyway, he was a driver, and we get in his car, and we're going out to Firewood to meet with George Harrison. It was George Harrison's brother driving. So we drove out to Harrison's Firewood estate, and I was like pooping my pants. You know what I mean? It was bad. I mean, I was freaking out. I'm going, holy shit, we're going out to Harrison's place. And so we get there, and we go in. This Firewood estate is this huge Victorian building that Harrison had been restoring the grounds and the gardens and the house and everything. And his wife Olivia's there. And anyway, we go into the side door. Actually, it wasn't even the front door. I think it was the side door. It was huge, into this huge entry hall, which is like 4 stories up, looking up. And we're waiting. It's real dark in there, and all this huge furnishings and stuff. We're standing around, and all of a sudden we hear this up on the balcony. Hello? And it's George. And it's George at the top of the thing, and he comes down in his bare feet and his T-shirt and jeans, and we're talking, and Fred introduces me. And anyway, we follow him up to the recording studio. And what was going on, he was recording the second. They were working on the second Wilbury album, and Jeff Lynne is in the control room. They got an engineer there and one other guy, and we end up in the control room. We walk down this hall, all these gold records, Beatle records on the wall, and we walk down to the recording studio, and Jeff Lynne is in there working on something, and they're working on these songs for the second Wilbury album. And I guess Teddy and the other guys had just left, so these guys are finishing up some vocals and doing stuff. Anyway, Harrison gave us a tour of it. Ended up having lunch on the front lawn of the estate with Olivia, with Fred and Dinah and myself, and then we got a tour of all the grounds and a tour of his entire guitar collection. He took us through the studio, showed us his entire guitar collection, which is massive, and pointed out each guitar and what song he played it on with the Beatles and who gave him the guitars, and went on and did that. And then as we're walking around the garden outside, we could hear the windows were open. We could hear those two, Jeff Lynne and George Harrison, singing the backup parts, putting these backup parts on the Wilbury album. And we came back up, and we were in the control room, and Harrison, Fred says, "Well, I want you to take a look at this guitar because they're doing a reissue of the black duo jet that's on that front of that one Harrison album." And so he gives it to him, and Harrison messes with it a little bit, so hands it to Jeff Lynne, and Jeff Lynne's playing it and messing around, and then gives it back to Harrison, and Harrison plugs it in and starts playing Beatles songs on it, see if it sounds right. Went through about 4 or 5 Beatles songs, and really liked it. And so, anyway, we ended up, that was about it, and then we ended up leaving. That was a pretty interesting day, yes.
Yeah.
That was. And then we went back, and the drums came in, and we had a good trade show, too. It was great. The Merce Festival was this kind of hippie new music festival that Karl-Heinz took me to, and he had to provide drums and stuff, and we were there for a couple of days. And it was a crazy festival, all new music. For an example, one of the guys, we came out with a case of beer, and put it beside him and sat down on his stool, popped open a bottle, drank a little bit out of it, and then blew across it. Ooh, put that bottle down, opened another one, drank a little bit of it, drank a little bit more, and then went, ooh. That was his composition. He went through a whole case of beer like that.
Huh.
And then, one of my favorite memories is a drum and bass duo that was there. And I'm going, drum and bass, that's interesting. And this was back at the beginning of when I went with Sonor. This was in the 70s, I'm pretty sure. So I'll get you the date on this, but it was Jojo Meyer with this bass player.
Really?
Yes. And I never heard of Jojo Meyer. And he was not really well known, but he kicked ass.
Wow.
And eventually he became one of the greatest endorsers they've ever had, for sure. He's brilliant.
Yeah, have you ever used his pedal?
No, I have not. Not yet.
I actually have. A friend of mine's got 2 and loaned me one to play at church. And I liked it. I didn't take any time to try to mess with any adjustments or anything, but it was the pedal feels great.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I need to get a new pedal. I need to try one of those pedals. I was going to get one of the Giant Step pedals, but I never got around to it.
I think the thing about the JoJo pedal is the simplicity, really.
Yeah.
And it attaches and detaches super fast from the hoop, and just very well thought out pedal.
Yep, and I'm sure he's instrumental in that, because he knows a lot about cymbals, and he knows a lot about sound and how to get, he's just an incredible guy.
What else have you got going on these days? I know about King Kong cases, and I don't know that everybody does, so do you want to give us a quick rundown on that?
Yes. All right. I have been playing drums since I was in 4th grade, and I went to college in Virginia and brought my drums with me, and was in, played in bands and stuff. After I graduated, I moved to Richmond, and I was getting tired of my fiber trap cases, so I built myself a trap case that just would hold stands. And I used this. I tried to make it look like an anvil case or what was then a flight case. But it wasn't terrific, but it had slots. I had 24 slots or no more than that. 18 slots, I think. 4x4 slots, and it was a pretty big piece. A couple of the other band members saw that I was doing this, and I built this, so I built a few more cases, and eventually I moved to Williamsburg and started King Kong in my garage, started King Kong cases, and started building more and more cases for different people, and just got involved with it, and found out about various extrusions I could get locally and things that I could make these things, and eventually it grew into King Kong cases, and it was, and I've been doing it ever since. Actually, all the time I worked at Hohner, I still had King Kong going. When I moved up to Holton, Maine to work for Sabian company for 3 years, I had an operation of King Kong up there and down here, and did them both. I did it from both locations. I've been doing it a while. I'm still servicing the percussion industry primarily, but I do build cases for TVs, just about anything, a flight case. You know, anytime you need to need a case to protect something in transit, I can do it for just about anything. You know, for Steve Weiss, Sabian. I do all Sabians. I do Sabian cymbal cases and Sabian Crotale cases. I build for the major percussion houses in the United States: West Music, Lone Star Percussion, Steve Weiss Music, and a variety of other ones.
And are you still hand building all this in the States?
Yes, it's made it. It's made it right in Ashland, Virginia.
Okay.
At the factory in Ashland, Virginia. Yeah.
What else do you have going on these days?
In addition to that, I presently am a road rep for EMD Music, which is Stag Products, and we sell also Remo drum heads and a variety of other products, but it's a full line distributor of everything connected to the music industry: guitars, stands, lighting, amplifiers, drums, cymbals, etc. I'm a rep for them. I'm a rep in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia for them. And then I also play music. Still play in several different bands.
Pretty active with that, are you?
I am right now, yeah. Yeah, it's very active, actually. I'm surprised. More now than I had been.
Could you see yourself ever working with the Sonor project for a distributor again?
After I left Hohner, I actually worked on King drums and developed a professional level miniature kit, or kids kit, in maple that was trying to provide a high quality instrument to the beginner market. I would love to work with Sonor again, or Slingerland, either one. But instead of that, maybe I'm still toying with the prospect of making some other drums, making another drum line here soon. The trouble with starting a drum company or building your own custom drums is the marketing of it. It's the expense of the marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Not really making the drums. Anybody can make a drum. I mean, and you see it all over the place. There's hundreds of drum companies out there now building custom drums and this and that. But I do have some other ideas to make, another drum set line. I've been toying with it, thinking about it with it for the last 3 or 4 months. So maybe something will happen like that.
Well, you still maintain a friendship with Karl-Heinz, do you not?
Oh yes, for sure. He's one of my best friends. I usually see him at the NAMM show, but this year I didn't go. But we keep in contact, and when he's in the area, we meet up and have dinner and hang out. Yeah.
Does that ever make you feel inclined to want to go back with Sonor? Your friendship with him?
Oh yeah, of course. The main reason to go back to Sonor would be to work with Karl-Heinz again.
Well, I appreciate you taking your time to talk to us today, and you've given us a lot of really good insight into the world of Sonor and even Slingerland and other things. How do you feel about the health of the industry in general?
From the rep perspective, I'd say the industry is down considerably. I try to sell a lot of electric guitars and acoustic guitars, and the electric guitar market has been off for the last, I'd say, 5 years compared to what it used to be. While the acoustic guitar market has increased significantly. Besides that, playing-wise, I think, there are places to play in all the big cities. The music industry is not as healthy as it could be. A lot of school budgets are still being cut for middle school and elementary school, and that's the feeder system for the high school band program, so that's a bit disconcerting.
Now, do you think that's in proportion to the health of the economy in general, or do you think it's even worse?
The first thing to go are the arts, and sports programs are funded a lot more than the arts programs in general in the United States. So